This is WXOJLP Northampton, 103.3 FM, your Valley Free radio station. Welcome. I'm Warren Odess Gillette, and this is A Baha'i Perspective. A Baha'i Perspective is a radio program that examines contemporary issues using the principles of the Baha'i faith. If you want information on the Baha'i faith specifically, you're welcome to visit the website www.baha'i.org. That's BAHAI.org. Or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE. Today I'm playing an interview with Mr. Paul Robbins, a Baha'i from Wilbraham, Massachusetts, who was formerly a political consultant and is now a public relations consultant for both corporate and nonprofit organizations. I started the interview by asking Paul where he grew up and what was it like growing up there.
Well, I grew up in the McKnight section of Springfield, which is a racially diverse section of Springfield. And what it was like for me was that I thought everybody lived that way. And it wasn't until there were quote-unquote race riots in my junior year of high school where I vividly recall not being able to leave the school because riot police had surrounded our building, and African-American friends of mine suddenly wouldn't look me in the face. I realized the whole world isn't like McKnight, where it's diverse both racially and socioeconomically. My dad was a political reporter, and at the time we were living in that neighborhood, he was the managing editor, eventually became the editor. So we kind of saw the big picture through my dad's eyes, and we lived in this neighborhood that was diverse, and it was the greatest neighborhood to grow up in. And my closest friend, who lives in Virginia now, that's the best part of his life also. He left when he was 13. And, the lessons we learned there are applicable to my life every day.
What year was that?
When
you had the race riots?
Would have been in like 72, 71, 72. People were basically being taken off of school buses and beaten. There would be whites who would show up to Tech High School and Classical High School where I went and wait for the bell to ring. So for a couple of years there, people who remember Springfield history, they stopped allowing the public, the fans, to go to high school basketball games for 3 years. So really? Every game, the championship, the semifinals, there were no cheerleaders, no rah-rah. The games were played in silence, basically, because the games were another opportunity for trouble to break out. And back then, the schools were very segregated. Commerce was almost exclusively black. There was some racial mixing at Classical, but it was mostly white. Tech was increasingly becoming more minority. So what happened is that's not the case anymore. The schools are much more. But it was kind of a defining moment for the community. And so, I had this kind of Pollyanna view of the world growing up in McKnight. So I was a city kid, and didn't think anything of all these bigger issues that are playing out in the world. And so, my view is that the world will eventually become like McKnight neighborhood was when I was a kid.
Yeah. That was high school. What happened after?
Well, I went to my second, realization that this is a problem came when I went to UMass.
Okay.
And more than 50% of the kids that go to UMass are from the greater Boston area. And I recognized then that there's an enormous amount of racial tension in Boston because they had, at the same time, they had busing. It was forced. Louise Day Hicks had become a national figure opposing it. There's a famous photograph of a white person taking an American flag, which is on a pole with a point on the end of it, about to stab an African-American man in a suit in Boston. Famous image. So I confronted that at UMass, and I was really, really taken aback that there was so much racial tension and that people so freely shared their racism and expected that I would just join in because I was white. And I said, hey, guys, this is crazy. What are you talking about? So it's interesting. My best friend who moved to the South at the time, he moved to Virginia, then on to Memphis. My best buddy I went to do a campaign for an African-American woman because I was a political consultant for many years. And his older brother also lived in Memphis, thought I was nuts. He said, the blacks down here are different than they are back home in McKnight. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you can't go into that neighborhood by yourself and work for these people. What's wrong with you? And I thought, wow, from zero to, he was probably 15 when he left because he's 2 years older than myself and my friend when they all left. Mm-hmm. What had happened? He had reversed what he had learned in our neighborhood, and it really demonstrated to me how easy it is to slide into that. The irony is, he said, I'm not going to allow you to go there by yourself. So I said, fine, Tom. That guy's name was Tom Hart. My best friend's John Hart. And John was like on the fence, like, well, Tom might be right, but Paul, you might be right too. But So Tommy Hart takes me into this black neighborhood to meet this all-black campaign staff. And within 10 minutes, he had melted. He's a carpenter. And I said, it's okay for you to go, Tom. I'm fine. He said, no, I'm going to stick around. And within minutes, he was, you need some shelves over there? Yeah, we do, because we have all this stuff, paperwork on the floor. Well, I'll be back, and I'll put the shelves up. And I thought, well, the first 15 years of his life, he thought racial harmony was kind of normal. And another umpteen years, whatever it was, maybe 10, he had kind of unlearned it, and within 10 minutes, he was back to McKnight. So
that's good. Yeah. Any other experiences in UMass that are significant?
Well, it was at the point in time, I was in UMass in the 70s, and I think what was happening was people were starting to get away from social consciousness. So I was kind of still stuck in, hey, we should be socially aware in what's going on. And I think that was the point where UMass started to get this reputation for, being a party school. So I was kind of straddling, that era. And you don't realize you're going through the era until you're already out of it. And I think that seems like such ancient history to me now. But the reality is, even through all these different changes, we still have these racial issues that are undercurrent in all of our relationships with people.
Yeah. And what did you study at UMass?
I was a political science major. And, of course, I remember going to my advisor in my senior year and say, what can I do with this degree? And he said, gee, I don't know. You don't know? Well, I figured something. I got out of school and I decided I was going to become a political consultant, which had nothing to do with my political science training in UMass.
So what was your first entry into being a political consultant?
Well,
is that the first thing you really did after you got out of college?
Well, I went to work under a federal program to work for a year as an aide to the Springfield City Council because I wanted to get some real-life political experience. And I'd taken a semester, like the University Without Walls type program at UMass, to spend a semester working as an aide to the City Council. And I kind of liked that. So I did a year there. And then I decided, okay, I got plenty of experience now. I'm 22 years old. I can just basically open up my business, foolishly. My first real client was Mike Dukakis, who was running for governor. And at the same time, I picked up...
And what year was that?
That would be 1981. And I got out of school in 78, and I worked in this city council job in 2 different stints for 2 years. Then I left and said, I'm going to just go conquer the world. This shouldn't be too hard. And, of course, it was very hard. And I was a field coordinator for Mike Dukakis, who was running against the sitting governor, Ed King. Ed Dukakis had alienated all of the political people in the world, so that was an education for me. And then I also...
And how did he do that?
He didn't play politics in his first... To his somewhat credit, it's a kind of a mixed bag, and a lot of people who were around at the time remember that. He didn't, quote-unquote, reward people.
Patronage?
Yeah. And to a fault almost. Someone could be extremely qualified, but if they had worked in his campaign, they were not allowed to apply. So that left some hard feelings. And at the same time, I picked up another campaign, Linda Melkonian, who was running for state senate. I had zero experience, but I convinced her that I knew exactly what I was doing, and we accidentally won that campaign. So my career was launched. I thought I was fine. Dukakis was governor, and Linda Melkonian was elected to the Senate, so I just thought I would sit back in my apartment, and people would call, which, of course, no one did. My refrigerator broke in my apartment, so I said, well, that will be temporary. The money will come at any moment. So I moved my food to a cooler on the back porch of my apartment and lived out of a cooler for basically 3 months. Because in June, July, it gets very hot. Yeah. So
that was a significant event for you.
Yeah, that was pretty eye-opening. Being in your early 20s, and you just feel you've had contributed to these political campaigns. And I was motivated to be in politics because of a sense of idealism, which later forced me out of politics and actually into thinking about my spiritual pathway. Because what you find is that it's really the system that's broke. You can elect all the nice individuals you want, but the system is corroding. So, but I needed to learn that. So eventually I picked up, because of winning and then regrouping and realizing I had to promote myself, I tended to get candidates that had no shot at winning. I accidentally won a few more, and so everyone thought I knew what I was doing. And actually you're learning as you're going.
And which ones were those?
I did a campaign in Chicopee for a guy who was running for mayor. Nobody knew, including myself. We won. I did, and then I eventually, I did Bill Bennett, who was running for DA and won. Brian Lees, who became also in the state senate, and mayor of Holyoke, and it just kept going and going. And then I really started to develop some expertise in it, and then got to the point that I thought there's something demeaning and debilitating about this industry, and started thinking. It was actually politics that brought me into contact with Baha'is, ironically, because Baha'is don't get involved in partisan politics.
I can imagine a political consultant, it's a very ego-boosting kind of occupation. And even if you lose, there's this energy involved in the campaign. But can you identify the trigger that made you think deeper about what you were doing for an occupation?
Yeah, let me go back on the ego boost. The reality is you're really out there. And I started to develop too big a reputation, and which felt very uncomfortable for me. I really wanted to just do the good work, get good people elected, and feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. That's really what I wanted to do. And when you lose, and it's very open because people debate these things. There's radio talk shows that criticize your work. There's people that call you up and tell you you don't know what you're doing. When you lose, you have to walk amongst all these people, and they're very joyful, some of them, that you've lost, and you learn a deeper sense of humility. I think what happened for me was that I started to lose that sense of idealism through the political system, and a defining kind of campaign for me was Bill Bennett's race for DA in Hampden County, and there were 4 candidates. All of them had met with me and urged me to work for them. And I had worked for one of the candidates before for county commission, and he was a friend of my family's, but he was the wrong choice. So I just decided to go with Bennett. And people really, really disliked me from that camp because I did that. And it was really an issue of conscience. And what happened is my office got broken into. My personal office within my agency got totally ransacked. Bill Bennett's law office was broken into. His headquarters was broken into. I received a threatening note. I said, something's wrong with the picture here. So I thought I needed to, exert some energy in a different way from my soul. And at the time, I had become aware of some Baha'is, and actually some years before that. And I had no spiritual connection at that point. I was a kind of quote-unquote fallen away Catholic. And, I had a jaundiced view of religion as a general premise, but I kept it on the radar, and the idea that I was getting out of politics. And I went to a conference in Sydney, Australia, International Association of Political Consultants, and I was really seriously thinking about ending my relationship in the political world and becoming a Baha'i. And we were doing a little tour. We had a day off. We're on a tour bus in Sydney, and I had taken my dad with me, as he was at retirement age and enjoyed this kind of stuff. And the tour bus went by the Baha'i Temple in Sydney. I said, all right, maybe that's a signal. So when I came back, I think I became a Baha'i not too long after that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So before you ran into the Baha'is, you had some sort of spiritual leanings in addition to your political pursuits. I was an altar boy as a Catholic, and I loved the religious part of the Catholicism, but I had a difficulty with the institutional part of it, and I felt that they were kind of at odds. And I had an uncle, God rest his soul, my Polish side of my family, who was very prejudiced, but he was in the front row at church, and he was aggravated with us, his nieces and nephews, who didn't participate that way. And I said, Uncle Kaz, how can you be so prejudiced and be in the front pew? And he'd get very upset with me, of course, for saying that. But if the only way you can get the spiritual part is to accept the institutional part, you're conflicted. And so I just kind of kept it on the deep radar, figuring, I don't know if I'll ever really embrace a religious concept. And I had kind of developed my own religious belief, which is that people are basically wanting to be united with one another, that the skin color is totally irrelevant, that our purpose is really kind of advance ourselves. And that was kind of it. So you always had this sense that there was a God and
I had this sense that he was out there and was going to direct me at some point. So I said, all right, when he's ready to do that, whenever there's just go with the flow. And, I'm much more aware of that now. I really kind of rudimentary sense of that way back then. But I figured there's a plan. Let's just let it figure itself out. Life's a long life, and you don't know what's going to happen.
So how did you run into the Baha'is?
Reality is I was starting to develop television spots for my clients, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I had produced a spot that was very successful. I had no clue. Really, I had no clue why it was successful. And I went to the local community college, and I thought, I got to get some night courses here. And I went to SDCC, and they had...
at Springfield Technical Community College.
Right, and they had a communications department. So I went to the head of the department and said, can I pick up some classes in the evening? He said, well, probably we don't have any evening classes. I'll tell you what I'll do. You can come to my home. I live in Amherst, and I will tutor you. I said, that's fine. Because I wasn't the greatest student at UMass. I ended up paying all these people who would have been professors for about 2 years, which is a whole other part of life.
I don't understand.
Well, like I had a political polling class at UMass, which I really didn't pay attention. I was mostly reading the Globe sports page. And, I got by. And then, of course, I'm going to become a political consultant. I don't know anything about polling.
Oh, okay.
So there was a pollster in Northampton. I paid her. And I'm thinking, I'm paying twice for education here. This isn't too smart. So I could have taken communications classes. I didn't. So I'm paying this guy in Amherst. I did this. This was like 2 years of my life. But it was really the best thing. So the guy ends up being Nat Rutstein.
Okay.
And so all these different diverse peoples coming in and out of his house. And
just as an aside, I do have an interview with Nathan Rutstein on my website, abahaiperspective.com if you're interested. Go ahead.
And that was probably 1979, late 79, early 80. And so he taught me, because he had worked at NBC. He had come to UMass, the School of Ed he had worked in under Dwight Allen, who had quite a reputation in UMass, and settled himself at STCC. And so I went to his house, learned the craft of messaging through video and television commercials through him, used that in the political work I did, which was very effective, what he taught me. And so he very gently told me, well, the Baha'is believe in this, this, and this. I said, wow, that's cool. You guys are out there, because I kind of believe all that stuff too. So then I took my time, 13 years to be exact, before I became a Baha'i. And he was very, was just there if you want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of comforted that there was a group of people that I felt, okay, I can do some work with these people. They're out there and they believe in this stuff, and that's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what did you transition to if you felt that political consultation was not? Well,
that was a big, how am I going to live? I vividly remember the cooler. It was green with a white top, and what was in it. And I also realized that, thank God.
What was significant? What was in it?
Well, you see, one of the things you realize is that there are a lot of things you can get in one helping versions. This was just starting to happen, so I would do that. Well, you have milk. You got to have milk because you have cereal.
Right.
You got to drink it within literally 48 hours because it's only going to stay cool for so long. You could put butter in there. So the basic staples that would, the core that's in a refrigerator, it would be in there. So, so having a memory of that, I said, God, it's a pretty big leap. This is a big part of your business. And to make matters even more complicated, I was representing a casino company at the time, trying to introduce gambling to Massachusetts, and Baha'is basically don't gamble.
Yeah, but you were saying you were pursuing things because from the altruistic point of view, the right candidate, the non-corrupt candidate. How did casinos get into that paradigm?
Well, I didn't see anything wrong with it, actually.
Okay. All right, that's fine. That's fine.
I thought it was okay.
So you thought it was like a good thing that it came.
Economic development,
Mm-hmm.
and, they're doing it in one place. It's kind of a contradiction to have it legal in one state and not another. It just seemed, we kind of trick ourselves. It's like to tell the kids don't do drugs while you're drinking vodka and, seltzer water. You have an ad, this is your brain on drugs, and the next ad is for Busch beer. That doesn't seem like a big problem. Mm-hmm. But obviously, more I delve, because you have to then really explore these things. I actually became a Baha'i at the time I was representing the company. Mm-hmm. But, God helps you out, because one of my early mentors told me that if the client doesn't listen to the advice, then you have to fire the client. And so I fired the client because they really weren't listening. I was trying to provide professional service. They weren't listening. I fired them. They called me back and said they'd give me $750,000 if I would stay on. And here I am thinking about the cooler. I had a partner at the time said, "Ooh, this is a big decision." And I just blurted out. I said, you guys don't know who I am. I have no interest in working for you. Good luck and goodbye. And that was it. Wow. So my partner thought I should be committed to an institution. And I said, no, this is the right thing to do. And it's against my emerging beliefs here. So I did it, and basically I learned to apply what I learned in politics to corporate clients. And now I'm doing an awful lot of social policy work. That just seems to, again, God's opened some door. I'm working for a very large family foundation, a literacy project, housing rehab, not-for-profit organization. And I have corporate clients like Peter Pan Bus Lines and Reed's Landing Retirement Community. And it just all has kind of evolved because I guess I let it happen.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been in this new direction? Well, not new, but this direction of doing corporate clients and social service organizations and things like that?
Well, I think...
it was sort of a phased-in thing. At some point, it was a combination of political...
you're constantly evolving and reinventing yourself, and that's accelerating, and that scares people. But the thing that helps me being a Baha'i is the understanding that institutions are crumbling while new ones are emerging, and that old ways of thinking are crumbling while new ways are emerging. And quite honestly, I tried. I still have some political friends and some, I still give advice on a kind of free basis to folks because it's generally nonpartisan. But I was asked to do a commencement speech for a political figure I'd helped get elected. And I said, well, can I do the speech I would do, or do you want to say something? He said, no, I don't care. You write what you want to write. So I essentially took the Baha'i principles and condensed them into a commencement speech and gave it to him. And the principles are an ever-advancing civilization, the fact that these old institutions are changing and morphing into newer, more representative forms of institutions. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't think anything of it, and he called me and said, what was in that speech? People were coming up to me after saying that was the greatest speech I ever heard.
Oh, my God. Wow.
So to me, that was kind of a confirmation. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to let it happen, and the world's changing so fast. I think people are looking for people that have some belief. You have to have a belief. You have to have a philosophy, particularly if you're in the business I have. Mm-hmm. You can't go to a grab bag and say, this strategy on communications will work. And it's process. A lot of it's process. And there's a truth that eventually emerges from things. So, I'm working for the Davis Foundation on this Cherish Every Child initiative in Springfield, which is aimed at kids from birth through the age of 6, because the research tells us that essentially your life course and your capacity is determined by 6, which is an opportunity and it's also scary at the same time. And they're targeting Springfield because it's poverty and educational system that's under duress, and they're trying to get kids ready when they go to school. They've spent this money in Georgia on the early ed system, and what they found is a dramatic decrease in special ed cases over time. So it makes the case that pay me now or pay me later. There's now a whole body of evidence. There's a Dr. Heckman from the University, I think, of Chicago, who's done the study on this. And there's other entities coming to the fore, including the Federal Reserve Board. And I went to a conference in New York last month where they basically said the return on investment is 15 to 17%. It takes 10 or 15 years to see that investment pay off. But the business community is in the middle of this sea change, which the rest of the world will start to hear about in the next 4 or 5 years. Instead of paying for prisons and, remedial programs, if you invest, which is such a Baha'i principle, the importance of compulsory education. So you keep bumping into these things that say that makes so much sense. So it's been the kinds of things that I'm involved with. I'm increasingly becoming in close contact with the human spirit and with people who 5 or 10 years ago, the business community really didn't want to hear about early education. Why are you bothering me about this? That's not for us. We do other things. And now they're getting it. They're around the table. A PNC Bank is funding a lot of this stuff, studies on this stuff. It's just the world's changing, and I think people are starting to value humanity in ways that maybe they didn't in our old way of thinking over the last.
So some organization like the PNC Bank, is it a vested interest that brings them to the table, or is it spiritual awareness?
It's a little bit of both. It's actually the profit motivation is number one. At this conference, it was funny because both liberals and conservatives were at it. The liberals were there for, and would talk about the altruism. The conservatives were, if we're going to spend money, this is the right way to spend it because everybody benefits. So my attitude is, who cares? I mean, where can you find an issue that rallies people from both sides, And increasingly, we need to find those kinds of solutions. Otherwise, a solution looks like my party or your party, and then it gets debunked by the other side. This is one of those that cuts across, and I think there's more of that in the future. And being a part of something like that on the ground floor is really, it's really inspiring, and it now allows me to have that that peace inside of me that's altruistic and based on some kind of idealism to be nurtured.
Mm-hmm. Now, I really got from early on in the interview that the race relations is a very important, subject for you or aspect of life for you. And I'm wondering, you talked about your confronting it at UMass, and the stark difference between that and what you experienced in McKnight. And I'm wondering, throughout your life, what you've done to sort of fulfill that important issue for you.
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things was Nat Rutstein, who was my kind of teacher in a lot of ways, he's an author also, and he's about to produce a new book, Healing Racism in America, and his current publisher at the time didn't have room for it. So we formed a publishing company called Whitcomb Publishing, and we...
What's the name of it again?
Whitcomb Publishing.
Whitcomb?
Whitcomb.
Whitcomb.
Yeah, because I was in the Whitcomb building downtown, so I thought, all right, I don't have to think about a name. Let's use that. And we published Healing Racism in America. And he started going out and lecturing. I became his agent. I would travel with him sometimes when I had the chance. And he was one of the proponents of these institutes for the healing of racism, which really were just a dialogue system for people to hear each other. It had almost a spiritual feel to it because it was in a place that was safe. And, we sold 16,000 books through the years, and that made me feel that's out there and that his work was out there. I also helped formulate something in 1994 in Springfield called Unity 94, which is a community-wide dialogue on race.
Now, did you work with Shireen Self with that?
Actually, Shireen, what we yielded out of that was a proposal to have a multicultural specialist in the school department, and we essentially pushed that Shireen would perform that function, and she did. A couple years later, I was on the chamber board, and I convinced the chamber board to bring in conflict management group from Cambridge, which sprung out of the Harvard Law School and Roger Fisher's work. And we did a retreat in the Berkshires and brought the players together. And it eventually ran out of steam because you need some infrastructure to keep it going. We tried to get something housed in the police department, and there was too many political chefs in the police department at the time. But I think we made something happen. We had people become aware. I had a client, worked for a cable company, was one of my first clients, my first non-political clients. Great guy. He worked in the Peace Corps in his college years. I really never thought about race after that. And he came up to me after one of these conferences, said, I'm really appreciative that you were involved in this. I learned things I never thought I would learn in this. So he said, I don't know how it's going to work in my life or in my business, but there's something in there now that I see differently. And so those were things that I spent a lot of time being involved in that helped me feel that I was trying to contribute something.
And how about today?
Today I realize you can't impose these things. You have to let it happen. And so I take more of a one-on-one approach on these issues with people and try to get them to see things differently. If I coach basketball and my team's all white, if we're playing an all-black team, I try to have a conversation without getting heavy with kids just about the significance of that. There's a movie out, Glory Road, great sports movie about the Texas and A&M basketball team was the first major Division I team to integrate. So I took my son to it, and we had a conversation. 11 had a conversation after. Imagine being a good basketball player and not being able to play. And he's like, "Well, that's stupid. That's terrible. Why would somebody do that?" Well, I can't really answer the question. I don't know why someone would do that. It's what we call prejudice, and I don't know how it works, but it's very powerful. So I think I take it more into day in and day out, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of, rather than the big, production. I think that's just where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I normally ask this question, but I kind of think that it might be a little bit more difficult for you. Imagine what your life would have been like if you had not become a Baha'i.
Well, I think I would feel less of a sense of idealism. I think I would feel more less optimistic. And I think when you realize that the Baha'i faith really kind of promotes this notion that the process has to unfold, things have to kind of get worse before they get better. When new institutions are born, there's a struggle. It's like a birthing process. So I think I'd be a little more jaded, and it doesn't mean that doesn't creep into my level of consciousness, because I'm a human being, and that's going to happen. But you really see the dots start to get connected. One of the things that's out there in the world now is the clash between Islam and Christianity. And so I say, just from my kind of political sense, how is there going to be a middle ground between these two huge titanic forces? And honestly, I don't see one. I see the Baha'i faith as an accommodation because it's inclusive of Islam and Christianity, which most people don't know. And I was just giving a talk on this the other night, and if you read the Quran, it essentially accepts all of Christianity and Jesus. The only woman discussed in the Quran is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Wow, I didn't know that. So I think if you're going to create just a logical accommodation, there has to be a third way. And to me, the way my mind works and the way I approach problems, the third way is always the best way. And in a sense, Baha'i faith is a compromise for all former religious history. It's going to take maybe 500 to 1,000 years for people to accept something like that. But you can see that there's no accommodation between these two forces that are drilling right into each other. The cartoons that were done about Muhammad, if there was such a depiction of Jesus Christ run in Western papers, you can bet the religious right would be all over that and be very upset, and would have a right to be upset about something like that. So we have zero understanding and not much more tolerance for between these two large forces, and people are scared. So they're hunkering down in their own fort, their own religion to some extent, and they're unyielding to the other side. And that's a recipe for the destruction of humanity. Mm-hmm. If we don't change it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul, very much.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Paul Robbins, a Baha'i from Wilbraham, Massachusetts, who was formerly a political consultant and is now a public relations consultant for both corporate and nonprofit organizations. If you want information on the Baha'i faith specifically, you're welcome to visit the website www.baha'i.org. That's BAHAI.org. Or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE.